So the next question we had, it kind of goes back to something we touched on a little bit ago. Is how do y'all think you should engage your narrative and like overarching responses versus like straight engagement in the line by line? So like just to give an example, here you talk in this rebuttal, you talk a lot about the argument about the exclusion argument, right? Like PF and PF judges are extremely biased against Latino debaters, and you cross apply that response in maybe 5 places. I can't remember exactly how many. It's a lot. So what do you think are the benefits of doing that kind of like narrative, like cross application debate versus super specifically engaging with like, no, their education warrant is false, 3 reasons.
Well, I think for me, first of all, like it helps create a narrative, but also many of these arguments are true, right? Like people talk a lot about like the benefits of substance debate, but the problem is that in the status quo, like there are not a lot of Black and Hispanic people who will engage in the substance debate or will like go through all 4 years of PF having like gotten all of that experience. Because many of us quit or like we don't even participate in the first place. And I think that kind of calling those things out instead of just like going through each point and trying to give like three generic like counter examples, instead like cross applying the case kind of helps, in many cases prove to the judges why like the current method of thinking that we have in public forum is so flawed. So for example, like people will just read a bunch of generic impacts about why substance is so great or why fairness is so important. But like they read those examples without taking into account what does fairness mean to like a Latino debater or what looks fair to like a minority debater. And those are things that you can call out by cross applying a case and having very similar things. I think another example in that case is like, well, yeah, that's the exclusion one. But also, like you mentioned earlier about judges having implicit biases and how that can impact things like roll of the ballots that talk about who's the better debater. I think that's also a great cross application of the K, right? Because in that example, we're talking about, okay, sure, like if we go back to the standard PF method of like evaluating the better debater, but what does that mean, right? In the status quo, that's like taller people, white people, men, right? People with deeper voices. And those are things that have to be taken into consideration. So for me, it's all about creating a narrative and letting the judge know that all of the examples our opponents providing at the end of the day are going back to this main theme of what PF looks like now and why that's such a problem. And going back to this idea that we need to change it. So for me,
Yeah.
that's just the general idea.
Another thing here, all right, I'll just let me say something really quickly.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of performance debaters are running their case like for activism, and I think that's true for like almost all performance debaters. That this is a thing that they want to do because they want to promote like the cause that the K is advocating for. They like truly believe it. It's something super deep and personal to them. And if that's true, then using these kind of overarching responses that applies everywhere and getting that narrative good is going to help the cause that you're debating, right? Because if people have these arguments that are like, do we really care if people know the 3 reasons why your education standard is like false? Because these are like arguments that I thought up of, or does it really matter that people know that debate is incredibly skewed against minority debaters? I think it's pretty obvious that the thing that this K is trying to say is the second one and not the first one. So I think it's a really important thing for getting to that end goal is using these kinds of responses.
Yeah, and also like instead of trying to like engage with everywhere on the flow, when in reality a lot of the stuff that comes out of second rebuttal is the same idea or same narrative. Like topicality good. Their roll of the ballot is bad because topicality is good. Like it's like the soul circular reasoning that it's just so easy to be like, well, we're gonna punish you for not interacting with the line by line on our critique. And
Yeah.
centering the debate around our critique is like a way of saying you don't interact with our critique, so why are we gonna like engage with your offense that means nothing?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely agree with Audit. You definitely don't want to like be forced to like spread so quickly that people don't understand what you're saying when it comes to your K, right? Or the story you're trying to present. But if you were to go like line by line and give those three individual responses to everything, like you would inevitably have to spread really quickly. And I think for me, like it's going back to like what are things you can group together to try to like reduce what you have to say. Like overall, you don't want to get into a debate where it's like you drop sub point three of point A of this overall point and then like lose the round. Rather, it's more about getting those general ideas and grouping things together. And I think for us, that strategy worked a lot, especially when people like dump responses because they're afraid of like really interacting with the K.